All right, let's jump right in. What we're about to explore is this really fascinating work, and it's less of a formal math proof and more of what you might call a number philosophy sketch. What's really interesting is that it doesn't come from a university math department. It comes from an artist, Hirofumi Miyauchi, and it challenges one of the most basic rules we've all learned about numbers. You remember this from school, right? It's one of the first, absolute rules of math they teach you. You can do pretty much anything you want with numbers, but you cannot divide by zero. It's just treated as this universal law, a total dead end. But why? In the world of standard mathematics, that operation is simply called undefined. If you try to do it, you get paradoxes, contradictions, the whole logical system just kind of breaks. It's not a problem to be solved, it's a cliff you're told not to walk off. And this is where it gets really interesting. This is the radical question at the very heart of the Unmod theory. What if that mathematical dead end, that error message we all learned, isn't an error at all? What if it's an instruction? What if it's an exit to a whole other dimension of information that we've just been, ignoring? So, to understand this idea of a portal, we first have to totally rethink what the number zero even is. This whole explainer is going to take us on a journey that basically rebuilds our idea of numbers right from the ground up. So, the fundamental building block here, inspired by the philosopher Leibniz, is something called the monad. Now, I want you to forget thinking of the number 1 as just a value. Instead, think of it as a single, indivisible packet of existence, a unit of pure presence. It's basically the atom of this new reality. Okay, so before we can actually use this portal, we're going to need a new map of reality. The author lays out this model that's all based on perfect symmetry and the conservation of energy, and it involves constructing not 1, but 5 interconnected universes to explain where numbers even come from. Let's try to break this down. It's all about balance. On one side, you've got Universe A, the pole of presence. Think of that as our world, where things exist. But, and this is key, for every bit of existence, every monad that pops up in our universe, the model says an equal and opposite monad of absence has to appear in its shadow, Universe E. This keeps the total energy of the whole system perfectly at 0. And right smack in the middle, you have Universe C, this neutral mirror that separates the two. The other two, B and D, they're just kind of the fuzzy border zones between these main areas. And this is what brings us right back to that portal idea. In this 5-universe model, the number 0 stops being just a placeholder for nothing. It becomes an active gateway. It's the point where the energy from that shadow universe, E, can flow back, or reflux, into our universe A without messing up the total balance. So if reality is built this way, what does it actually look like? The author argues that that simple number line we all learned is a totally incomplete picture. Instead, this whole model builds into a completely new geometric shape for how numbers exist. And here it is. This is the central visual of the whole theory. Forget the line. In this way of thinking, all numbers, positive, negative, 0, infinity, all of it exists on the surface of a 3-dimensional sphere. And this isn't just a cool new way to draw it, it's a fundamentally different structure for reality itself. Now, on this sphere, we can find some things that look familiar. There's an additive circle called CX, which basically works like our normal x-axis for adding and subtracting. Then there's a multiplicative circle, CY, which acts kind of like a y-axis for multiplication and division. So far, so good. But this is where things get really wild. There's a third axis, the existence circle, or CZ. And this axis doesn't measure a number's value, like how big it is. It measures its degree of reality. Is a number fully present? Is it fully absent? Or is it maybe somewhere in between? So here's the kicker. What if our entire system of mathematics, everything from 2 plus 2 to advanced calculus, is just a map of one tiny little slice of this sphere? Specifically, the first octant, where the values on the x, y, and z axes are all positive. It means we might have been working with just 1/8 of the total picture this whole time. All right, so we've got the model, we've got the geometry. Now let's see what we can actually do with it. The author calls his new set of rules reflux calculus, and it's designed to work in this new space. So what finally happens when we use it to divide by 0? Well, it becomes a 4-step process. First, just picture the number 5 sitting there on our familiar x-axis. Second, the command divide by 0 isn't a math problem anymore. It's an instruction. Open the portal at 0. Third, the information of 5 gets dropped into that portal. It doesn't disappear. And fourth, it just gets remapped. It lands on that new existence axis, the z-axis, at a totally new coordinate. The value just got converted into a measure of existence. And this graph shows us exactly what that looks like. That red line, that's our familiar number line, the x-axis. But the blue line, that's the new existence axis, the z-axis. And you can see as the value on the x-axis gets closer and closer and closer to 0, its matching value on the z-axis just shoots straight up toward infinity. Now, what happens if we take that cool 3D curve and just flatten it back onto the 2D plane that we're all used to seeing in math class? Well, we get this, that classic spike, the vertical asymptote where the function just goes to infinity as it gets close to 0. What this theory is suggesting is that there's a hidden third dimension that's the reason we see this behavior in 2 dimensions. And that leads to the author's most provocative conclusion. The paper basically states that, historically, every time mathematicians wrote 0 in certain kinds of equations, they were unknowingly pointing to a hidden infinity on this other axis. Infinity isn't just way out there at the ends of the number line, it's been coiled up inside 0 this whole time. But look, this isn't just some philosophical game. The author's real ambition for this theory is to give us a new mathematical language, one that could maybe help solve some of the biggest unanswered questions in all of physics. For about a century now, physics has had these 2 incredible pillars. You've got general relativity, which is amazing at describing the universe of the very, very large, and you've got quantum mechanics, which is amazing at describing the universe of the very, very small. The problem? They are totally incompatible. Their math just does not line up. So this theory speculates, maybe the conflict isn't with reality itself, but with the language we're using to describe it. What if our standard mathematics is just too incomplete, too flat, to capture the full multidimensional nature of how the universe actually works? And this is how that new language could reinterpret some of these big ideas. In quantum mechanics, we say a particle can be in multiple states at once, and we use probabilities to describe that. In this theory, that state could be seen as its literal degree of existence on that z-axis. Or take cosmology. The singularity at the center of a black hole is a point where our physics just breaks. Here, it's not a breakdown, it's a portal, a place where information is literally moving between these dimensions. As the author says directly, the great challenge of modern physics might not be a physics problem after all. It might be a problem with the fundamental space that our math defines. The tool itself might be the very thing that's limiting us. And that really leaves us with a final, fascinating question. Now, this number philosophy is a sketch, right? It's a thought experiment. But it forces us to consider a pretty profound idea. If the very language of math we use to measure and understand the universe is only showing us a fraction of the full picture, what other fundamental truths might be hiding in plain sight just 1 dimension away?